So I want to review the Boondocks episode "Smoking with Cigarettes," and what happens in this episode is that there's this character Lemilton Tayshawn, and he exists in the world of the Boondocks. And a little backstory about Lemilton Tayshawn is that he's based on a real person, Lemilton, who was an 8-year-old kid. And what happens is he steals his grandmother's car and he goes joyriding, and he just caused a lot of damage. And what happens is that his grandmother really points out that, growing up, he saw a lot of violence between his relatives, and that she hopes that he can have a second chance. So there's a lot of senses of, her being very dismissive. And then the other thing as well with that is that there's another incident where he assaulted his grandmother, and then he gets taken into custody because of that, and more than likely put him in a psychiatric hospital. And the Boondocks is doing their own spoof of this, so definitely this is a very Riley driven episode, and I kind of like that because Riley's definitely a very interesting character, and I do feel like that this is the third season, so definitely there's things that I like about this episode and I don't like. So I think through the episode, what starts it off is the incident where, instead of Lemilton driving, it's Lemilton taking Riley as a passenger, and they destroy a bunch of property. And after that, Granddad beats the hell out of Riley. And I counted that he hits him with a belt close to 15 to 20 times. And, Riley's acting all tough and stuff like that. And then he actually shuts up when Granddad says, it's going to happen again if he doesn't be quiet. So I think that what happens, that Magruder's trying to do is say that, there are kids like Riley who act tough and they'll still hang out with bad kids or do whatever because sometimes they have this mentality that they want to be a gangster or want to be tough. And that's kind of why, some kids, get into trouble is because of that machismo that they have. But also, too, that some kids like Riley don't have a good sense of reason. So that's it's kind of crazy time of night. But that's why they they continue down hanging out with bad kids. Then later on in the episode, he and Lemilton hang out together and they do a bunch of bad things. And I think this is kind of interesting because they do things like throw a baby doll into traffic. They throw a doll into traffic. They throw a burning mattress into traffic. They throw trash in traffic. And they cause a bunch of accidents and they hurt a bunch of people. And I felt that this was kind of interesting or controversial because Riley is kind of laughing and finding it funny that he's causing mayhem. And obviously people are getting potentially hurt, potentially killed. People of all ages. So it's interesting how you have Riley do this, but later on in the episode, when he sees Lemilton shoot a dog and Lemilton threatens him at gunpoint, he's more concerned about that, really. Or when Lemilton's watching violent videos. So I think that with Riley, maybe he has an issue with violence. Like maybe if it's upfront violence, meaning that you're actually shooting somebody, he will react. But if he does something like, cause a traffic accident, he's not going to care because all he sees is the destruction of the cars. He doesn't actually see the bodies and the panic and the anger and the frustration and the people being scared and if the cars have children or whatever. So, Riley does have some sociopathic tendencies, I do feel. And then later on in the episode, what happens is that Lemilton intimidates Riley into hanging out a little bit more, and then it's later revealed that there's this this white guy, and I believe he was a former teacher of or counselor of Lemilton that follows Lemilton and Riley around, and warns Granddad about Lemilton. And this is kind of the other part of the episode is that they take the Lemilton character, and I'm saying The Omen, which is a film about the child of Satan. And I've not seen it, but I just know a little bit about it. But I think that they're trying to make Lemilton this evil character like the Antichrist or the spawn of Satan or something like that. And even like when Milton's arrested, his number is 666. And I actually looked it up online that actually his that the opening interview you see with Milton is inspired by The Ring. So there's like this idea that he may not just be a bad kid or a kid with sociopathy, or psychopathic behaviors. He may also just be a demon or a monster in disguise or something supernatural. But I think that doesn't work for the episode. You need to kind of have it one way. Either make him supernatural or don't make him supernatural, because that's in good writing. You don't just mix it together. But I think that they're trying to say that he's like the spawn of Satan as one of the jokes, really. And I think, and then also later in the episode, Milton invites Riley to his house, and then he has a gun, and this freaks out Riley. And then later on in the episode, Riley's playing basketball, and then what happens is Milton grabs him, and then they go to they go hang out together. Milton wants to rob a place where the owner has a bunch of guns, and once again, it's showing Milton doesn't care about himself and the safety of Riley, and he ends up shooting a dog. He's put into a system, the system, gets arrested again, maybe mental health system, and then he gets released. And I have to stop for a second, and I have to say that that's also kind of a satire for what happens in real life, because I do work at a psychiatric hospital, so there are situations with what happens where that sometimes, they release kids too early. Sometimes their solution is to send kids home as soon as they figure out the right medications for a kid. And usually the kids get off the medication and go back to their old behaviors, or sometimes they have to behave good for a while and they get released. So it could be faking and being nice to get out of there, or sometimes, and it's just like in this episode where they don't think that there's enough evidence, or it's hearsay or whatever. Like, some kids just know how to get out of trouble, or some people's parents know how to get their kids out of trouble, and this continues a pattern of bad behavior. And then also earlier in the episode, Milton's grandmother apologizes to Granddad and really talks him into giving Milton another chance so they can be friends. And Milton also does a fake apology type of thing. So it's kind of like also talking about how another issue with some kids who have bad behavior or have psychopathic behaviors, that they don't have the right parents for them. They don't have the right support system. And then just like with Milton's grandmother, she keeps making excuses for his behavior and says, oh, well, it's because he had a violent upbringing. I mean, he was around like seeing abuse and other bad behavior of his parents. But again, you have to be a decent human being. You can't just do bad shit because, you see other people or relatives do bad stuff like that. You have to be accountable for yourself. So I do think they do satirize her character very well. And then through the other parts of the episode, where Milton's watching violent television, he has access to his grandmother's gun and other things like that. It really, really emphasizes, maybe also the other issue is the lack of her being a strong disciplinarian, or just like Eric Cartman's mom, where she may be more of a disciplinarian when she gets publicly embarrassed versus actually at home. And then Milton has a lot of boundaries. Usually when you have a kid with violent tendencies, you kind of don't let them watch violent movies or whatever. You also maybe say, you know what, while I have a gun, I may not have a gun in my house because I have kids with mental health issues. So it's definitely that. And I think the other thing that I would say is that after he gets released, he and Riley go to a school with a gun and everything like that, and Riley gets the gun away from Milton, and they fight on the roof. And I think that this is kind of one of the worst parts of the episode, because it kind of turns it more into a fight and just, solving the end of the episode with a fight situation. But I think that they could have done some other choices. And then you have Uncle Ruckus, appear and just make a funny joke and saying, oh, it's just two niggas killing each other. And I kind of like that too, because that's also true of the media and everything like that, that sometimes people want to see two ignorant black people like fight and kill each other, or black youth. So it's kind of like saying, well, that's just how the American system is. They don't always care about, what's best. What's best. They rather see two people kill each other out of ignorance. The next thing that I will say is that it concludes with Riley with a kid asking Riley if he wants a cigarette. This kid asking Riley if he has a cigarette, and I think that the point of it is that Riley has to really learn who to pick and choose who his friends are. So obviously, the start of the episode started with Riley getting a cigarette from Lamilton and smoking a cigarette. So does Riley want to meet the next psychopath and just a next bad kid? He has to learn to say no. I just been through all this shit, so I'm gonna watch, pick and choose who my friends are gonna be. And that's definitely the lesson, I think, of the episode, is that you have to really pick and choose who your friends are, because sometimes you're in situations where you're with somebody who's crazy and they'll hurt you, or you try to break off the friendship and they'll destroy you. So, really pick and choose who your friends are. Pay attention to the signs. And just because you may be glamorized by how somebody does outlaw behavior doesn't make it right, and is more of a sign to get away from that person instead of actually being cool. And then the other thing is that in the black community, this is also true for black girls, is that there has been issues with a long time of black women liking the bad boy, or instead of hanging out with a black man going to college, they would rather date a killer or date a drug dealer or a drug lord and be like, what, that's bad, that's gangster or whatever. So that's also another one of the issues that I think is alluded to with Lamilton. You can be wowed by a person with a bad character, or be like they're getting things the outlaw way. But in the end of the day, you pay the price for hanging out with those types of people. And it's also true that that's an issue in the black community, where sometimes there's glamorization of people who do the wrong thing. And ultimately, when you have those people in your life, you end up in a situation that's very, very bad for you. And you definitely don't want that. And I also will say that I think that the weakness of I didn't like the episode at first, but I think when I look back at it, I do think it's really just a big commentary on picking and choosing who your friends are, and that's the main theme of the episode. I think that when I first saw it, I kind of saw it more as, featuring Lamilton and kind of spoofing that he's the Antichrist and turning him into a flanderized character. But I kind of think of it's more of the main message is you pick and choose who you want in your life or not want in your life. And the other thing that I would say is that if I was to do this episode of the Boondocks, I would kind of make it like with what happened with the real Lamilton. This advice show was showing that also at the same time, what happened was that there was a white child that was doing the exact same thing, where he was taking a car and he was causing a bunch of damage. So I was saying to myself, what would have happened if you had an episode where you featured Lamilton and Riley doing bad things, and then they go to jail and they have issues, and then you also feature a white kid doing the exact same thing, and just like in the real world, like they had this kid on Good Morning America or a local news station and talking about how cute it is that he wants to be a reckless drive, that he drove and maybe wants to ride race cars and whatever. And when Lamilton got in trouble, they put him in the system. Like the second time that happened, they interviewed his grandmother, and his grandmother talked about how he doesn't have his parents in his life, illustrating the stereotype that black men are not there for their kids. And then also, like, they made sure that he was featured with white police officers correcting him. So it illustrates that idea of, of white police officers fighting against black lawlessness. So what if they did an episode about that, about the double standards when a black kid does a crime like reckless driving and assaulting their relative, and they have a white kid do reckless driving, and there's really no consequences except that kid looking like he's cute. It may be like he gets on TV and everybody's understanding that he's impressionable. So I think that would have been a more superior episode. But I do think that just maybe not making the message clear of Riley picking and choosing who his friend should be And that's something you kind of come up with a little bit on your own. On your own, I think if they were more on the nose with it, it would have been a stronger episode. But I also think that the whole idea of making Lamilton like a demon character or the spawn of Satan, I think that it kind of removes all types of insight. And then also, if they want to do an episode of the double standards when a black kid like Lamilton commits a crime and a white kid does the exact same thing, and he's kind of seen as impressionable and cute, I think that would have made a stronger episode. So there could have been stronger creative choices with this episode. But ultimately, it's an episode that's really powerful, and I really hope that the real Lamilton saw this episode and kind of just took it as something to be embarrassed by. And I think the story about the real Lamilton is that he's now doing well. He's in college, and he's also trying to be a football star. So thankfully, he turned his life around. And if this episode was kind of like a public shaming of who he once was, he needs to be embarrassed by this and be like, it's a reminder of who I should not be, because he can do more than being another black kid going to jail or whatever. And just because he was around violence growing up doesn't give it an excuse for his behavior. So that's all I got to say about Smoking with Cigarettes. And also, importantly, the main message of the episode is you need to pick and choose who your friends are. Otherwise, you're putting your life in danger, other people's lives in danger, and also your family in danger. So be smart about it. That's the main message of this episode.